Welcome, travelers. You found your way to something old, a world forged across decades, filled with ruin and fire, light and redemption. This is more than just a story. It's a memory, a myth, a living echo of something far more ancient than parchment and ink. Across this channel, you'll hear the legends of a broken warrior, of kingdoms and shadows, of battles both within and without. Some truths are hidden. Some names will wait to be known. But for now, sit close, the flame burns low, for what you hear may very well change you. Fireside Tale 2: The Cleansing of Daggerholt. The tavern door creaked open, drawing a pause in the low murmur of conversation. The storyteller stepped in from the night, cloak damp with rain and boots heavy from the road. This time, the air did not stiffen in suspicion. Instead, a few heads turned with recognition, even welcome. The innkeeper offered a subtle nod and motioned toward the hearth, where a chair had already been drawn close to the fire. A space waited for him. One by one, the tavern's patrons turned from their conversations, their attention drawn to the storyteller's arrival. Unlike his last evening there, they looked not with suspicion, but with interest. "I assume the cost of such a fine place near the hearth is another tale?" he asked, voice edged with dry warmth. The innkeeper chuckled, already turning to pour from the tap. "Aye, that, and maybe a few mugs of ale or mead for good measure. Be it a fine tale." He moved silently to the flames, boots leaving wet prints on the worn floorboards, his movements betraying his attempt to hide himself and showing the demeanor of something, perhaps one who had fought before. Shadows danced across his face as he leaned forward, letting the silence thicken. Then, in a voice low and woven with embers, he began. "So, which tale is it you'd ask of me to tell?" This time, it was the innkeeper himself that had a request, since a good number of the others scattered inside the inn withheld their own words. This must have been discussed before his arrival, showing they not only expected his return, but had hoped for it. Walking over with a large mug filled to the brim with ale, the innkeeper spoke. "I'd hear a tale of the initiate himself," the innkeeper said, his voice steady with purpose. "We may be far from the kingdom of Arkenfell, but many of us have heard of him before." With a smile creasing the features of his face, the storyteller answered, "Some tales begin with kingdoms, or with the breaking of them. But tonight, I will tell you one of the man himself." Taking a sip from the drink the innkeeper set in front of him, the storyteller began. "The village of Daggerholt was small, filled with quiet and honest folk. Good soil, simple prayers. But one night, the forest near their fields opened its mouth, and what came out wasn't meant to exist. They had sent messengers, pleading and even begged for help. And help came, but not in the way they'd expect. It didn't ride on a white horse. It didn't wear a crown. It walked in silence, covered in scars, with eyes that hadn't slept in days. Accompanied by a small but potent force of soldiers, sent from Arkenfell itself, came the eternal initiate, the man still learning what he was, and what he must become." As the fire cracks louder, the storyteller's voice becomes a whisper, pulled into the shadows. "As for the Brezekian, our eternal initiate, there is another name many called him, but not one known to all. His true name, as simple as his pursuit of duty. His name was Seth." The storm unleashed. The night was thick with rot and screams. Daggerholt, Once a humble village nestled between the arms of two ancient hills, now crouched behind its crumbling palisades like a wounded beast, its people clinging to silence, huddled in cellars and prayer. Something old had woken in the dark woods beyond, something twisted. Livestock gutted, children stolen, bodies returned with their faces turned inward, mouths agape, eyes black as tar. They had begged for help, and the eternal initiate had come. The battlefield was in a shallow ridge just outside the village's gates, where torchlight flickered like dying stars against the ink-black tree line. The creatures had emerged with the moon, horrors born of nightmare. Bodies split with spines jutting outward, faces melted into permanent screams, too many arms, limbs too long, each one ending in barbs or mouths or twitching eyes. Their flesh stank of bile and rust. Their howls fractured the air like cracking bone. Seth stood at the vanguard, surrounded by a thin line of veteran soldiers, scarred men, grim women, warriors hardened by siege and time. But even they whispered now. Their weapons were slick with ichor, their armor dented, eyes wild. They did not fight alone. Seth fought with them, not in front of them, not apart from them, but among them. Each man and woman was a wall, each blade a breath in a larger rhythm. They moved together, shoulder to shoulder, breathing in sync, gritting their teeth through wounds and exhaustion. "Goddess," one muttered, parrying a clawed limb with a buckled shield. "We can't hold them much longer." A shield-bearer grunted, blood dripping from a gash above his eye. "Where's the second wave? Where's Thorak?" "He'll come," Seth said, not turning, deflecting a serpentine maw with the pommel of his blade, and driving his knee into the beast's chest. "Hold!" His body moved without hesitation, but inside he watched, he saw. They were afraid, every soldier, fear in their breath, in their stances, in the tremble behind the eyes. And still they fought. They did not have his strength, his wards, his training. But they chose to fight. Every second they stood, they defied death. And Seth, he felt small beside them. "I should have been enough," he thought. "I should have kept them safe." His wards shimmered faintly like moonlight on glass, silent sentinels against corruption. They did not make him stronger. They simply allowed him to endure the rot, the whispers, the unnatural malice woven into the beasts. The monsters surged. Steel rang. Blood sprayed. Seth's sword slashed clean through a beast's wrist, spun, and buried itself in another's gullet. He ducked under a blackened tail, slammed his elbow into a mutated jaw, pivoted as another creature lunged and dragged his blade across its spine. One after another. Step, pivot, slash, parry, move. A spear snapped beside him. He caught the falling soldier before she hit the ground, shoving her behind the shield wall. "Stay low!" She nodded, blood in her teeth, but she rose again. "Left!" someone cried. Seth turned, shield raised just as a tusked brute slammed into him. The impact cracked bone. He was thrown backwards, shoulder grinding in its socket. The monster lunged again, and met his blade in its maw. He shoved the beast off with a guttural roar, spit blood, and stood again. More were coming, dozens, maybe more, a shadow of them rising from the tree line like an avalanche of flesh and malice. And from among them, something worse. It towered over the others, hunched and broad, its skin split and festering with glowing tumors that pulsed with unnatural light. Hooks jutted from its spine, dragging chains behind it like a tail. Its face was a mask of jagged teeth, and its eyes were sunken voids that bled black smoke. The soldier's line wavered. Then it roared, a sound like mountains grinding against each other, and reached down, grabbing a screaming fighter in both hands, and with a wrenching twist, it tore them in half. "No!" Seth roared. Surging forward, he slammed into the thing before it could reach another, blade flashing, eyes burning. He struck its side, his sword bit deep, but the thing didn't even flinch. It swung a bladed arm, and Seth blocked it with his shield, but the impact shattered it. Wood and steel exploded. He was flung backward into the dirt, coughing blood. His wards flared, brighter than ever, their radiance increasing along with his resistance. The creature was steeped in something unclean, something unnatural. He rose, bleeding, broken, but he rose, and met the beast head on. The duel that followed was no elegant dance. It was survival. Seth dodged crushing limbs, parried jagged bone blades with a sword that refused to chip or bend. Brezekian steel, forged in the old rites, meant to cleave through the unnatural. The beast's claws raked across his side. Another blow caught his leg. He stumbled, but kept moving, always forward. He struck under its ribs, twice, rolled beneath a claw, brought his sword down through its arm. One arm fell, but the other slammed into his back, and he felt something snap. He collapsed, spat blood, and rose again. His wards howled. Each time the creature struck or brushed against him, they blazed to life, searing the corrupted flesh where it touched him, smoke hissing from the burns. It recoiled in agony, shrieking with a voice that scraped at the minds of every soldier nearby, a sound torn from the very edge of madness. And Seth drove his blade up beneath its chin, through the roof of its skull, but it did not die quietly. It bucked, a violent thrashing of limbs and chains, lifting Seth clean off his feet. He held on to the hilt with both hands, twisting deeper as he was dragged through the air. The creature slammed him against the ground, once, twice. He could feel his bones rattling every time, but he never let go. With a final roar torn from the pit of his soul, Seth planted one boot against the monster's chest, wrenching his sword free in a spray of black ichor, and dropped to one knee, breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature staggered, its jaw gaping, shrieking as its limbs twitched spastically, collapsing into itself like a tower of corrupted bone. Then it finally fell, dead. The soldiers stared, bloodied, wide-eyed, and then as one, they charged. Their courage returned, a fire rekindled by the cold defiance of the man who had refused to fall. Then, from the forest, came the horn. "To the initiate!" Thorak came like a storm loosed from the mountains. His axe shattered bone, swung in great arcs that cleaved through the abominations as if they were made of straw. His war cry cracked across the trees like thunder. Behind him surged a flood, soldiers in full plate, war-painted and roaring, a second wave that had looped around the ridge for an ambush. "Break them!" Thorak bellowed. "Kill these abominations!" The enemy staggered, confusion, and then slaughter. Thorak tore into them like a god of ruin. His massive axe split bone and sinew, carving through the abominations in wild, thunderous arcs. Heads were taken clean from shoulders, torsos cleaved in twain with wet cracks and gurgling shrieks. He grifted the haft with both hands and swung with the weight of a siege engine, pulping one beast's skull so completely it burst like rotten fruit. Gore painted his arms, his chest, his face. Still he roared, "For Daggerholt! For Arkenfell!" He stomped over the corpses of fallen horrors, grabbed one creature mid-leap by its throat, and hurled it into its kin, crushing them both against a tree with the sound of splitting skin and snapping bark. Seth and his bloodied warriors met the charge with renewed fury, driven not by hope, but by fury and defiance. Every muscle screamed, every wound wept, but they pressed on. Seth moved through the chaos like a blade drawn across parchment, silent, deliberate, deadly. His sword flashed beside the hammerfall of Thorak's axe, and then they found each other, back to back amidst a maelstrom of rot and teeth. "About time," Seth rasped. "Thought I'd miss the fun?" Thorak bellowed, grinning through a red haze. The warriors stood together, the eye of a bloody storm, one cold and relentless, the other wild and thunderous. Abominations hurled themselves at them and died in pieces. The screams were everywhere now, not of the villagers, not of the men, but of the monsters. Their numbers cracked, the spell of fear they had cast shattered, and Seth, cut, caked in blood, his sword glowing faintly with a soft inner light born of soul magic, stood beside Thorak, his face a mask of sweat-drenched resolve. Seth's blade pulsed with residual energy, alive with power he did not yet understand. It had answered him in the fight, but without discipline, without control. "I need to learn to control this," Seth thought grimly. "I have to." He looked around, the blood-soaked field, the mangled corpses of beasts and men alike. So many had fallen, too many. His eyes locked on the lifeless forms of soldiers who had stood with him, fought beside him, and died believing he could hold the line. "If I had been stronger," he thought, a cold knife of guilt carving through his guts. "If I had been better, maybe they would have survived. Maybe they would have lived." More souls lost, more families torn apart, all because he hadn't been enough. Too weak, the thought echoed. Still too weak. Thorak grinned, blood in his beard, and strode the few steps towards Seth with the confident swagger of a man who had just danced with death and left it bruised and bleeding. His massive axe still dripped with gore, one hand resting on its haft, as though it were a walking stick. "Hell of a mess," he said, wiping a smear of blood from his brow, then rolled his shoulders and cast a glance over the carnage still writhing beyond. "Time we finish these things." After they had swept up the last of the monsters, the soldiers began regrouping and assisting those who, due to their wounds, had trouble walking or were unable to at all. And Seth, with the glow emanating from his sword dissipating as his soul magic ebbed away, stood beside Thorak, covered in blood both his own and of the creatures. "You got here just in time," Seth muttered, voice hoarse. "I was starting to fall apart. Thought I might have gotten them all killed. The soldiers, the villagers. If you hadn't come when you did." He didn't finish the thought, jaw tightening. The weight of the dead pressed on him like armor he couldn't remove. Thorak smirked. "Took longer than I wanted to get a bunch of steel-clad lugs to charge up a hill into a pit of hellspawn. But we got there." He clapped Seth on the shoulder, heavy but with meaning. "They held the line, Seth. None of us would have brought down that nightmare bastard. Not alone," he said, nodding toward the hulking corpse not far from them. "We'd be fertilizer in the mud if you hadn't stood your ground." As the sun began to rise, casting pale light over the ruined field, Thorak strode among the soldiers. They were gathering the corpses of the creatures, some still twitching faintly, others frozen in mid-scream, and hauling them into the massive pile for burning. The stench was unbearable, and the blood clung to everything like tar. Thorak, still catching his breath from the long night, asked one of the wounded veterans nearby, "Where's the initiate?" The soldier looked up, blinking away exhaustion. Another younger soldier knelt beside him, wrapping a bloodied bandage around his arm. "Is it true what they say?" the younger one asked. "That he can survive wounds no man should? That the markings on his skin protect him from whatever those things were?" The older soldier shrugged, grimacing. "Maybe, maybe not. But he stood there while they came at him like waves on a reef, held us together. That's truth enough." Thorak's face tightened as he listened. "I don't know what he is," Thorak said at last, glancing toward the horizon. "But I do know what he did, and that's more than enough. Now, where did he go?" The soldiers weren't sure where Seth had gone, only that they last saw him speaking quietly with some of the villagers. His voice had been low and tired. Thorak moved off, weaving through the wounded and the work, asking the villagers if they'd seen him. One elderly man, still in shock but clear-eyed, nodded slowly.
He asked where we bury our dead,
the villager said.
Took a shovel soon after, and he apologized. Told us he was sorry for not coming sooner.
Another woman, her hands still shaking as she wrapped cloth around her child's leg, added,
It felt wrong, hearing someone like him say that. None of this was his fault. None of you should feel that way.
Thorak only nodded. His jaw had been tightening the entire time. He followed the directions given and made his way past the outer ridge, to a sloping hill behind the village where the early morning light crested like a blessing on sacred ground. There, already waist-deep in a half-dug grave, was Seth, still blood-soaked, still wounded, his cloak torn, ribs bandaged with the length of someone else's uniform. His hands trembled from exertion, but they did not stop. He dug in silence, the shovel striking earth again and again. Thorak didn't speak at first, just watched him, watched how every movement was a quiet vow. After a moment, he stepped forward.
You're not supposed to be digging, you stubborn bastard,
Thorak muttered, voice quieter now.
Your injuries are too deep, even for you. You should be resting. I can hear your bones popping from here.
Seth didn't stop. They fought with us, Seth said hoarsely. They died because I wasn't enough. The least I can do is bury them with my own hands. Thorak sighed, stepped beside him, and, after a pause, picked up a second shovel from the grass.
You can't take this all on yourself, Seth,
he said, voice rough but steady.
You didn't bring those things here. You didn't kill these men, and you sure as hell didn't fail them.
Seth's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. The shovel kept moving. Thorak set his shovel into the dirt beside him.
You're strong,
he added, quieter now.
But even you can't carry this weight alone.
They dug together in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the words had already been spoken. Buried deep in the earth, they turned together. The fire back in the inn crackled gently. The sounds of battle fade into memory, and the silence of the inn wraps around the storyteller like a cloak. Patrons are hushed, some nursing drinks gone warm, others staring into the hearth as though the tale still lived in the flames.
And when the sun rose over Daggerholt, it brought no triumph, no celebration, only the breathless stillness left in the wake of survival. The ground was torn, the air stank of ash and blood, and yet the village endured, because the line had held, because Seth stood when his body begged him to fall, because Thorak roared when silence nearly swallowed them all, because soldiers fought not for glory, but because someone had to. And when it was over, when the last nightmare lay still and the dead were counted, it was not kings or lords who mourned them. It was the man who had bled beside them, not as a hero, but as a man who refused to let them be forgotten. They would speak of that night in Daggerholt for generations, of the storm that did not fall from the sky, but walked beside them, wreathed in blood and fire. The storyteller reaches for his mug, then pauses, lifting it just slightly, his voice softer now. To those who dig the graves, to those who carry the weight, to the ones who hold the line, even when no one sees them. A beat of silence, a long sip, then the fire speaks for him. End of tale. To be continued. What you heard was only one thread. There are others, hidden in shadow, whispered by the wind.
waiting for the right soul to listen. Until then, remember the fire.